This is the audio recording for India under British rule. I will keep to the format that I've started using on the last few slideshows, where I'm mainly focusing on reading these slides rather than just kind of talking about it. I will add a little bit of information here and there and do some sum up, things like that, but mainly focusing on just reading the slides. So let's get to it. Next slide. Trading. In 1601, the British business East India Trading Company arrived in India and began setting up trading posts. That is the same East India Trading Company that was featured in all the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, for those of you that might have that question. Great Britain began trading with India in the 1660s. At first, the British were only interested in trading goods such as ivory, gold, silks, dyes, and spices: cinnamon, saffron, pepper, sugar, and vanilla. So at first they were only interested in getting product. They were not interested in anything else. Next slide. This is a picture of Sir James Lancaster, who commanded the first East India voyage in 1601. And I would not recommend getting that type of collar on your shirt. I don't know if that's ever going to come back in style. So no, don't do it. Next slide. A colony. By 1760, Great Britain had gained economic and political control over India. Great Britain officially took control of the entire country when it declared India a colony of the British Empire in 1765. So they've gone from just being a weird trading partner to an actual full tilt member of the British Empire. Next slide. This is a picture of British citizens in India. Notice they're posing with wildlife from the country, but also take notice that in most of the pictures you're going to see for the next few slides, Indians are reduced to kind of a second-class citizen, and kind of off to the side, and not, even though it's their own country, they're not featured in good ways, really. Next slide. Another example here, you see British men working some kind of clerical job or a legal job, and you see in the background you have the Indians kind of lined up as gophers or just office assistants, but not anybody that's going to have any kind of official or really important role. Next slide. Colonial life. Great Britain took complete authority over the colony and denied Indians any role in the government of their nations. Indians were treated as second-class citizens in their own country. There was inequality under British law. So now not only are the British getting all the good jobs and getting more rights, they're also better protected by the laws. Indians had several laws placed against them in their own country that did not apply to the British. And so you can see these things, this definite sense of inequality, this unfairness that's going on here. Next slide. This is a picture of a British family who is living in India, and notice you again have several different Indians in the picture that are all kind of in a servant role. Even small children, you can see in the back middle, that small child is actually just there to wave a fan to keep somebody cool. So not a good deal. Next slide. Colonial life. Indians also faced discrimination and unjust treatment in British society. The best jobs and schools were only available to the British, and Indians were also taxed heavily by the British on goods that were found in their own country. I do need to explain this real quick. What would happen is the British would take cotton that was produced in India. India was very big on weaving and making cloth. But the British would take the raw product of cotton and take that back to England, have it manufactured into cloth there, and then bring it back to India and sell it at a price that was way higher than it would have been for the Indians just to make it themselves. But they also had laws that said you had to get it from the British. So it's one of those situations where they were really taking advantage and kind of abusing their role as the kind of governing country over this colony. Next slide. One more picture of British citizens kind of just using Indian people as servants. Again, you see the younger person there with the fan, and this person is apparently just getting a manicure and things like that. So again, not given very good jobs here. Next slide. Resentment. Indians began to resent being ruled by a foreign government and began to protest for changes. Great Britain eventually offered some reforms, but they were small and not enough. Indians were frustrated with the lack of change and began to call for Indian independence. So you can imagine, with all the way they've been treated, the Indian people want the British to go and let the Indian people govern in their own country. Next slide. This is actually a woman in a kind of cart type thing, except for instead of wheels, she actually has 4 Indian people that are there to carry her places. So they're literally carrying her on this cart on her shoulders, and they have the younger child there that's kind of a person to go and get things and to run into stores and whatever it is. But just again, manual labor, not good jobs. Next slide. All right, nationalism. In the 1800s, a feeling of nationalism grew in India. Nationalism is a belief that people should be loyal to those with whom they share common history and customs. It's a different definition than what we've seen and what we've used in class before, but if you think about it, it actually lines up fine. Nationalism, we've defined it as a love and loyalty for your country, and that fits in perfectly with the idea of being loyal to people that you share common history and customs. So those two works just fine. It's just another way of saying it. The first 2 groups to work for the rights of Indians were the Indian National Congress that started in 1885 and the Muslim League, which started in 1906. These 2 groups work together for much of the Indian independence movement. There is fracturing and disagreement at the end between these 2 groups right before India gets its independence, which leads to some problems down the road. But for the most time, they work very well together. Next slide. This is a picture of the first Indian National Congress from 1885. World War I's impact. During World War I, millions of Indians joined with the British Army. The British Parliament promised them that when the war ended, Indians would be able to have more control of their government. This was, a big thing for the British Empire, was the fact that even though that they were all over the world, what they would do is they would actually have their colonies and different places that they controlled supply the troops that would fight in the army for them in different places. So the Indian soldiers often served in places like Turkey and Egypt and places like that. Next slide. You can see Indian medics here during World War I, helping to heal. I'd say British soldiers, but it's looks to me like they're actually helping other Indian soldiers which are under the British Empire. But you see kind of a British officer leaning over the top of them. Next slide. Protests. Unfortunately, nothing really changed after the war, and some Indian leaders argued for taking over the British government by force. Many Indians were upset with the British false promises. Basically, another way of saying being upset with the lies. And those who protested were arrested and sent to jail for up to 2 years without a trial. All right, and there's a special name for that, which we'll talk about in class. Next slide. Amritsar. In 1919, outside of the Temple of Amritsar, British soldiers started shooting a large group of Indians who they claimed were gathering illegally. During this terrible tragedy, over 400 people were killed and 1,200 were injured. It was this awful massacre that spurred Mohandas Gandhi into action to fight for India's independence. This is something that we will see represented when we watch the film Gandhi, and it's really a turning point, but it's also very, very sad. These people were just gathering. It was literally a crowd of peaceful people that were having a meeting, men, women, and children in this group. So it was a big, big deal and terrible tragedy that really united the Indian people. Next slide. This is a painting representing it, and it's actually pretty accurate from what I've seen. It was in the shooting occurred in a courtyard. The British soldiers were kind of lined up on one side, and then they just kept firing into the crowd basically until they ran out of bullets. Next slide. This is the memorial at Amritsar, and you can read the inscription there. You can pause it, whatever. But it's the place that it actually occurred and everything, and it can be visited. It's just a place that you can go to and note. But like I said, it was a terrible tragedy, and it was a kind of a very big turning point in India's quest for independence. So that's it for this presentation, and you will see where this goes into the next presentation when we start talking about Mohandas Gandhi. Done.